Hey guys, Lieutenant Colonel Kieran here, and this video is kind of an on-demand video series that we're going to do real quick. I'm going to go through kind of each ride that our students do in the syllabus and go over what I teach during these rides as I give them during the syllabus. So first off, who is this video for? It's for anyone. I think specifically it's for the instructors that are just coming to the squadron who don't have the breadth of experience with the syllabus that some of us old hats do. So if you haven't seen a ride 1 or ride 2 or ride 3 with students, a lot of times you don't know where those weaknesses are going to be with students. And then for the older guys in the squadron, the guys who've been doing this for years, this just might be oh, I never thought about teaching that during ride 2 or ride 3, and it might pimp you to do something new, something different, and something better for your students. So I want to begin this by saying, by no means is my instruction, do I think that my instruction is better than yours or that I've got this down. I am just giving you some tools to add to your tool bag to help you as you learn the syllabus and you fly with students more and more and more, and you start developing your own things that you're teaching through the program. Until then, this can kind of be a placeholder for what you teach. Okay, so the first ride in our syllabus, 1 Pro, is probably the most difficult ride to teach to, and that's kind of why we make sure that that's part of that fit syllabus that you go through as you're upgrading to student instructor. And the reason it's so challenging is because there's just so much packed into this one sortie. Oh, by the way, for a lot of these students that we're getting, this is their first shot at the airplane, and so we're setting the tone for a lot of the habits that they're going to have for the rest of their aviation career. So it's super important that we give them good training both in the aircraft and on the ground. We've added a route to this ride. So it used to be just Pro, exclusively Pro, get their Form 8 checked off, signed off because they did their check ride in the simulator. We added a route to it to kind of keep it a little bit interesting, give them a little bit more exposure, but that gives you a little bit more work as an instructor to teach to. So it's super important that we're sitting down with our Pro 1 guys the day before and going over some of this stuff, because the briefing timeline that we have right now just doesn't really, isn't too conducive to learning all the stuff that at least I have to teach. So I want to give them at least a little bit more exposure the day before we go to brief and fly, and that way maybe they can go home and think about it and process it and come to the table and be ready to fly and do a little bit better and succeed. And we want them to succeed, right? So as part of the briefing, again, this one briefing is one that I kind of cruise through a little bit, okay? And I'm not remiss, I'm not missing things necessarily, but it's an IP demo, and I want my students to see that it's kind of brief, okay? I want to hit the big rocks and cover the big important things, but I don't want to belabor the 280. I don't want to go through every single line of it. And I'm kind of teaching that to them as well. You know, we don't need to go through every line of the 280. That's why we have the 280, so that they can reference it, etc. I cruise through the briefing part of this one because there's a lot that I still want to teach at the tabletop. And if you've seen the other videos I've made, I really think there's so much value to the pre-brief that we give our students, okay? So you really have to do your best on this one to kind of get as much in there as you possibly can. And I'm gonna go over some of the basic things that I teach, usually to kind of your pipeline student, the kid who has never flown the airplane before or never flown a C-130 before. These are the things that I kind of teach to. So we'll take a look at the pad back here, and I'll show you what I teach. Okay, so again, this is not an all-inclusive list of everything that I teach on the first ride with students. This is also not a list of what I think you should teach necessarily all the time, every time on the first day with students. This is just some stuff I've been teaching for a minute, some stuff I've been teaching lately that seems to hold well with students and help them learn. Now again, I've spoken to this in some of my other videos, but really what I'm starting to learn as I'm going through and doing a lot more research with teaching students and teaching instructors is I'm really learning the importance of attention. I really need to get my students' attention for them to learn well. And at the tabletop, is probably the best time that I have their attention. In the pre-brief, I have their attention because they're not flying a handful of airplane, and it's not the end of the day in the debrief when they're kind of exhausted and they're ready to go home. I've got their undivided attention in the pre-brief. So again, if you can get these talking points or use some of these talking points to help with your teaching, have at it. If you don't agree with them, that's fine too. Or if you're developing your own, that'd be great. I'd love to hear what they are. But this is what I'm teaching right now to students on day one. So here we go. First thing I talk about with students is the differences, the inherent differences between the simulator and the aircraft. And we all know what, you know, there's a litany of a whole list of things that are different between the sim and the aircraft, but I acknowledge that with the students. And the first thing, before I go into just the differences and the sim is terrible at this and the airplane's different at this, the first thing I do discuss with my students is that I acknowledge the fact that the training that they've gotten in the simulator is good training. The guys that work on the hill in the simulator give us an excellent product. And I see it every student that comes down, they've been given a really good baseline of training. And we just have to tweak it from there. But I feel like we'd be doing our students a disservice if we said, well, the hill, I mean, those guys, they teach one thing, but we do it different here in the airplane. It's really not different in the airplane. Now, the software and the hardware in the simulator does have some minute differences, and that's what I'm going to go over. But first I need to acknowledge that the training that they've gotten up on the hill is good training, okay? The next thing I talk about is steering and brakes. And again, talking to this at the tabletop is, before I go to the plane for the first time, is really powerful, because again, I've got their attention and I can kind of go over, okay, so the sim did this, here's what the real aircraft does. I speak to the steering and brakes. I will sometimes go so far as even talking to them about how to hold that tiller. I see a lot of students just have this death grip on that tiller, and they're not using the cheater ball at all, etc. Brakes, you guys know at the simulator, those brakes just are not the same as in the plane. One, you can't feel it in the seat belt, but two, I think they're just a little bit squishier in the simulator than they are in the airplane. So I kind of go over, okay, so this is what you felt in the simulator. Here's some tips that I use to be good at brakes and not put my Loadmaster in the corner pocket on the first try of using those brakes. So that's one thing I talk about. The next thing I talk about is inside of 50 feet. So again, the simulator is great. The visual software that they have in the simulator is excellent, I feel, until about inside 50 feet. And you guys have seen that. The simulator just can't do the randomness of the air masses that we see in the pattern every day. The flare picture is a little bit different. You don't get that seat of the pants feeling in the simulator that you'll have in the airplane. So I speak to that. How are things going to be a little bit different in execution in the actual airplane than they were in the sim? And then the last thing I talk about is entropy. And then for those of you engineer students or physicists, entropy is just the lack of predictability that we have in the airplane versus the simulator. Whether it's radios, whether it's pattern saturation, these are all things that we can't really simulate up on the hill, but are very real in the airplane. Just these unknown, predictable things that are just happening that are different than that controlled environment that is the sim. So I address that, and what I really want to speak to with my students when I speak to entropy is the fact that that's usually when things get ugly with the student. When things become unpredictable or not as they planned, that's when things get ugly with their piloting. So I say, hey, I acknowledge these things are going to happen that are unpredictable, that you're not ready for. Roll with the punches, stick to what you know. They trained you well on the hill. Let's move on, okay? The next thing I talk about, and for those of you who have flown with me before, with a student, have heard me say this, and I say it all the time in the pattern. I say it especially when we're doing assaults. I talk about equal opposite, and this is really just an airspeed technique that I talk to, and the reason that I speak to it at the tabletop is because I want students to get what I'm saying in the plane. Because if I just say, if a student's just flying in the pattern and I just shout out equal opposite, and I haven't given that context at the pre-brief or given the definition of the pre-brief what I mean, then there might be a little confusion in the plane, and we definitely don't want that in the pattern. So equal opposite, for those of you who don't know, is basically just using that energy carrot and airspeed tape and moving them on equal opposite sides of this horizon line to get on speed. And you guys do this intuitively now as instructors. You've flown the plane enough. But what I've seen with students coming to the flight line is they still use that airspeed indicator as their primary airspeed tool or reference. And if they really want to shack airspeed control, what they need to do is be using this energy carrot and airspeed tape. You guys use it, you guys love it, so let's teach it and get this nomenclature down so that they understand it. And when I say equal opposite, basically what I mean is I want these two items on equal opposite sides of this line here, this horizon line in my climb dive marker. These should be equal, and I am correcting for on speed, right? So in this instance, if I've got a student who is fast and getting faster, instead of saying airspeed, dear student, you might hear me say equal opposite, which means I want you to move that energy carrot down on the other side of this horizon line down here, and you will be correcting for the airspeed that we have bugged. So again, I'm not forcing you to teach this technique, and this is definitely a technique, but I want to make my student clear that when I say this is what I mean, so that we're all on the same page, right? And the importance of getting this in your scan, in your cross-check early on, because this ride, these guys are so impressionable on this ride, and what they learn on this first ride in the syllabus might hold through their entire C-130J career, okay? So the importance of getting good habits down, teaching some good techniques, and not too many, but just some good solid techniques that they can take and apply at the plane, okay? Last one I'm going to give you guys as a consistent teaching topic that I use with this first ride is the how to land. We all know that, again, the simulator is a little bit different than landing the real plane. I do let my students know that, hey, don't get hurt feelings if you're not really good at landing this plane on day one. We don't expect that, okay? C-130 is a harder plane to land, and it takes practice. So I tell them, you're not probably going to be consistently good at landing until you do this 100, 200, 300 times, okay? So first and foremost, I let them know that. But secondly, I speak to routine. And I think this is a really important thing for students, not just with landing, but just in general with tactical flying, C-130 operations, air land, is having your routines, okay? Because if you have routines down, then you're doing the same thing consistently. We tend to not miss things, okay? So I teach my routine that I use when I'm flying in the pattern, and you know what? There's 7 things that I do every time I fly a pattern and land on the assault zone. So I talk to my trim, I talk to the things that I say. You know, for example, I roll out on final when I'm doing an assault landing. I roll out on final, and every time I roll out on final, I say, established on final, bug me threshold. That's just part of my routine to land every time. So I go through my 7 things, and you might have 8 things, or you might have 18 things, or you might just have 1 thing that you consistently do as part of your routine. But I speak to that. And what my secrets to success via routine are to land the plane and land it consistently well. The next thing I talk about, again, you guys know this, but it's not always so clear with students. I mean, the sim, we talk about trim, and yeah, they do the trim a little bit, but that backstick pressure in the simulator, to alleviate that backstick pressure or forward stick pressure in the simulator just isn't quite 100% correct. So I speak to, here's when I trim, here's how I trim, and as part of my demo when I'm doing assaults especially, I will even as part of my routine, roll out on final, establish on final, bug me threshold, run the trim, and then once I get the trim in what I think is the aircraft in a good trim state, I'll kind of take my hands off the airplane, not to showboat, not to show off, but just to prove that I can point this airplane at the assault zone, I can be on speed, and I can have the FPA that I desire, and I can take my hands off, and for the most part the plane will fly to the zone with minimal corrections from me. And that's a really powerful tool, because what we see a lot on these ride ones is students jockeying the throttles and all over the place with the yoke. And if we can get in their head early that, hey, trimming the airplane on final is going to get you in a much better situation to land, and your propensity for success on the assault zone is so much higher when you do have the airplane properly trimmed. You know, that's just important to talk to. So you might have your own way of telling it to your student, but I do stress the importance of trim and getting there. Then I kind of go back to, hey, the previous talking point on assaults and on landings in general, the importance of using this energy carrot airspeed tape, my equal opposite, and the aim point, and what I'm actually looking at in the HUD to determine my aim point, whether I'm long, short, left or right, and so I demo it, and then I'm also kind of calling it out for them on the first two. After that, I kind of let them do their thing. I don't want to be chatty Cathy there, but I do talk to equal opposite. And then point number 4 on how to land that I talk about is the power pull. We get a little bit of negative transfer from T1s, T38s coming into the C-130, in that students would pull their power at like 50-20 feet to flight idle, and then it's just flare. So this is out of the equation. Well, in the C-130, as we well know, and especially in heavier gross weights, a power pull like this can become a dangerous endeavor. So, and it's not just the power pull itself, and you'll see this with students, and this can be kind of harrowing sometimes. It's the rate at which your student pulls the power. And so I speak to that. Hey, it needs to be a nice controlled rate of power pull as I'm coming into the flare. And if I'm chopping the power, guess what? My airplane sinks. So I speak to that again, and the importance of the power pull, and I kind of give it a little levity, and like, hey, this is when I get scared, please don't scare me, and I speak to that. And the last thing I talk about in the how to land section is your heads up. Out of the HUD, get out of the HUD. So inside 20 feet, you know, we should have the airplane trimmed ideally, we should be on airspeed ideally. Now I need to get myself past the HUD, looking at the end of the runway to see that sink rate, to see that yaw that I might have in, correcting for winds, crosswinds, but I stress this, and then I let them know that, hey, in the airplane, you know, today on the first 2 or 3 at 20 feet, I might say, okay, head out of the HUD. So again, they're ready for it, and then when I'm saying it, they're not confused. They know what I'm asking them for. But again, these are just a few of the things I teach on my One Pro. If you want to use them, again, that's awesome. If not, that's fine too. If you've got some great teaching that you do on your One Pro, or some things that you see consistently that students just aren't getting and you need to coach them with, I'd love to hear them. So on to the next video.